Alright, so I'm going to do my best to get through all of my notes in as timely a manner as possible. So I also wrote this out with the intention of posting it online so people can read it. So a lot of this stuff I have already typed out beforehand. So if I start to sound really animated like I'm just reading a script, that's because this is designed that I don't have to tell you, you could just read it. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I come across as a little bit robotic when I'm doing this. I call this class Building Better Battle Games. In this class, I will be covering what I consider to be the fundamentals of battle game design. This is not going to be a comprehensive course on the subject, as there's far too much to cover given the allotment of time that we've got, but this is going to serve as a solid foundation for utilizing this process in the future. And I also have a more in-depth course available online that I did on the Kingdom page when I was Kingdom Champion last year. So if you would like to see a little bit more of these concepts gone into in more depth, I have that available online. So my goals for this class are to establish an easy, repeatable formula for successful game design. So that is something that I think a lot of new and aspiring smiths really need, is something that is easy to understand, that is repeatable, so they can just keep following the same steps and they will get success as long as they stick to the program. So that is my first goal for the class. My second one is to recognize and avoid common pitfalls in the design process, and as a little bit of backstory to that, the reason that I got involved in battle game design way back whenever, many years ago, was because as a battle gamer, I was frustrated with some of the games that were going on because I saw them as I saw poor designs being taken advantage of, being abused, and it led to a lot of unfun games that I was personally involved in. So I took it upon myself to look at how we design battle games and try to restructure and eliminate a lot of those flaws that led to unfun scenarios. So recognizing and avoiding common pitfalls in the design process. The last goal that I have for this class is to encourage critical thinking and personal development within the scope of game design. So, before we begin, I want to clarify that this class, the way that I do things, all of this is not the correct way of doing things, as there are many successful game designers out there that don't necessarily utilize the process that I utilize. And of course there are exceptions to every rule, so you as the consumer, as the student in this position, don't allow anything that I say throughout this lesson put you into a box when it comes to your personal implementation of what you learned today. These lessons and fundamentals are merely the tools that I use and have found success with, but each designer has their own journey to make and their own process to figure out. So throughout this whole course, throughout this process, glean what you can, but the way that you design is ultimately up to you as individuals. So, understanding what our tools are and how to use them is critical. So before we move into the actual design process, I want to dive into some clarifications of some key points that we'll be working with. Game design as a whole can appear really intimidating when you first come into the game, when you first start looking at things and think, man, I want to design games. How do you do that? You know, it can be a really intimidating process to start up with, but when we break things down into their simplest parts, the whole process ends up very smooth and easy to understand. A good battle game is one that is enjoyable for everybody involved. That includes the players, the reeves, the designer, everyone. Everybody should have a good time when you are running battle games. So, a major factor of enjoyment for both players and staff is clear communication and understanding of the rules. Unfortunately, for us as game designers, the average attention span of an Amped Guard battle gamer is notoriously short, so we need to take it upon ourselves to be aware of that in all aspects of our design process. But fortunately for us, every single game type and or objective that we use can be broken down essentially into one of three categories. So every battle game that you have ever seen run probably devolved into these three things. So those three things are kill, capture, and control. That's it. That's Amped Guard in a nutshell. When you are playing battle games, you are killing, you are capturing, you're controlling. That's essentially it. And when we take that and we understand that when we break everything down into building blocks, that's what we come up with at the very foundation of what we're doing. So, these 3 objectives form the building blocks of every game that we design, and when we break them down to this level, it makes it much easier for us to understand and implement them well. So let's start with some definitions to help build our understanding of what these are and why they're important. So, kill. That's a pretty self-explanatory objective, right? Make sure the opposition dies before you do. This is the easiest and most generic objective that we utilize, and with good reason. We're a combat sport, we like to hit each other, so kill the opponent is a very easy mechanic that everybody's going to understand. It is easy to understand and therefore requires very little explanation, and people get to playing faster without having to sit through a bunch of rules explanation to figure out what's going on. Common examples of a kill style objective is team deathmatch. Everybody's got 3 lives. Team deathmatch. When you shatter out, you're dead. First team to shatter out loses. It's a pretty simple objective. Infection style games. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Halo, playing Infection, where the more people that die join the enemy team, and it just goes until the survivors are wiped out. It's an example of a kill objective. Survival style games where there's an attacking team attacking a defending team. It's a kill style game. Kill point games where people don't have lives, you just track how many deaths there are. It's a kill point game. Kill the captain. It's a kill objective. Monster fights, anything where you're teaming up and again, I'm just giving examples of how versatile this objective can be, but when you break every single one of these games down, it's just kill. That's the objective. Let's see. Alright, so the second objective that we're going to talk about is capture. This objective focuses on an object or objects that must be moved from various points on the battlefield into a single secure location in order to score. Again, very easy to understand at a base level. Additional layers can be added, such as objectives having special rules or collection points being mobile, stuff like that. But at its base level, again going back to the building blocks of battle games, this is an easy, identifiable objective that your players will have a firm grasp of. And additionally, this objective adds an element that players or classes that are more heavily mobility focused, such as your assassins, your teleporting wizards, stuff like that, they're going to excel at these style of games and enjoy them more than other objectives because it's something that their strengths will play into. Very, very mobility-focused objective. Common examples of this would be capture the flag. Everybody knows how to play capture the flag. It's a very simple concept, so you can just say, oh, we're going to play capture the flag, and everybody's pretty much going to know what you're talking about. Collect the objectives. I have collect the cones written down on here, but cones isn't necessarily a thing you have to use. Anything where you're gathering objects off of the field, stuff like that. Even stuff like heavy object, like the game that we played earlier today with the cart, is technically a capture game because you are grabbing an objective and moving it to a designated location, so it favors mobility-focused players. The third objective that we have is control. Remember, kill, capture, control. This objective focuses on an area or areas of the battlefield that players will attempt to keep free from enemy influence, either indefinitely or for specific amounts of time. Control points are really effective at centering the action on the field and drawing player attention to specific locations. This creates a much more static dynamic that typically lends itself better to defensive, less mobility-oriented play styles. It also continues with our theme of simplicity and is easily explained or understood as a mechanic, and that is something that your players are going to appreciate. Common examples of that would be bridge battles. So we had a bridge battle today. The concept is to control the majority of the bridge, right? So you see that in action out there on the field. Node control. If you've ever played node control where you're trying to keep enemy players out of the circle, it's an example of a control game. Ring the bell. If you guys have played Ring the Bell, that's an example of a control game. You're trying to control the bell as long as possible, or up to the count, whatever that is. Raise the flag, which is very similar to node control, but it's an example of a control game type. And push the cart. So, Push the cart or very heavy object, like we played earlier today, is a good example of a mixed objective because it is mobility focused in the sense that you are trying to move the cart, but it is also a control style objective because you are focusing all of the player's attention on that one central point. And as long as you can control the area around the cart, I mean, you're basically going to win. So that's pretty much a hybrid objective that we can utilize a lot in a lot of our objectives because, again, it's very easy to understand and it kind of fills both of these roles. So we get the extra playability for mobility classes and the extra playability from those defensive-oriented, less mobile classes. So these three things make up our building blocks. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, only 3 objectives? Won't people get bored of these really quickly? And the answer is deceptively simple. So these 3 objectives make up nearly every battle game that has ever been designed. Variety is a matter of packaging. So when we come to an understanding, as I stated earlier, of breaking things down into their simplest parts, we get a really easy process with which we can lay our foundation, and then from there, we can build up really intriguing and unique ideas that we can confidently move forward with because we know that the foundation is solid. So, if the class was bigger and there were more people with the experience in this, I'm sure that I would be getting questions of, oh, well, what about this game objective? What about this game objective? What about this game objective? And 99% of those questions would boil down into kill capture control in some fashion or another. Now, again, like I said at the start, there is an exception to every rule, so not every single objective that has ever been played is going to fall into these 3 categories, but 99.9% of them will. So, like I said, that's pretty much every game that we play is going to fall into these 3 categories. So when we use those as a building block and we break those down into the easiest to understand portions for us as designers, it makes it really easy to build up from there. So now we're going to get into the process now that we've gone over the building blocks. Step 1. So this is the first thing that I do whenever I start building a new game. Determine how large your game is going to be. So different sizes of games have to be handled differently, so it is critical that we take this into account at the very beginning of our design. This has to be the first step because everything hinges on how many people are going to be playing the game. There is a little leeway to either side depending on the field you're designing for, but as a general rule, I look at 3 different sizes as standard design points. The first size is what I call Shire. That is fewer than 10 players. If you have less than 10 players, you are designing a Shire level game. Fewer players on the field means less opportunity to strategize and plan, typically resulting in faster paced gameplay and shorter increments in time. They also have the additional hurdle of trying to balance skill levels without very much wiggle room. When you have somebody on a field of 10 people, if you have 2 people that are really good and 8 people, or let's say 7 because less than 10. So you have 9 players, you have 2 that are really good, or 3, let's say 3. 3 players that are experienced, know what they're doing, and are really good. And then you have 6 players that are pretty new and are roughly on the same playing field. You have 9 people. How do you split the 3 good players? Because inevitably, you're going to create an imbalance, right? So this is a hurdle that you have to deal with when you're designing a game in a Shire level. And it's not going to be the case for every single thing that happens. We're not going to get numbers like that, but you guys get what I'm saying. So, when designing games of this size, there's not enough players to really spread attention out very far, so we are going to choose one objective from our list. Remember, our list is kill, capture, control. So if I'm designing a Shire level game, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm designing for less than 10 people, I'm going to make a kill game. That's it, right? So the next step up from that is what I call the barony game. So it's going to follow the different levels of parts, you know how that works. So barony level is anywhere from 10 to 20 players. A moderate amount of players means a lot more opportunity for strategy and teamwork, so our design can accommodate additional layers to account for that. When designing games of this size, there are enough players that we can confidently spread out their attention and have it enhance their gameplay rather than be a detraction. So we'll choose 2 different objectives from our list. So anytime that we are designing a barony level game, I'm going to just give an example. Let's see, I need a barony level game. Let's go kill, control, capture, kill, control, capture. Any combination of 2 different of the 3 objectives. And then finally we have our Duchy Plus game. 20 or more players. At this point, we have reached the highest step as far as design process and numbers. We have enough players to pull out all of the stops and have things go smoothly, so we'll implement all 3 objectives from this list. Players beyond this point have greatly diminishing returns, so this process caps at 20 plus. It doesn't matter if there's 20 players or 200 players. The concepts in place are going to remain the same from this point on. So even designing a game for an international or a inter-kingdom level field will follow Duchy Plus process. Duchy Plus process again is just implementing all 3 objectives. So your games are going to be kill, capture, control together. Right? Does that make sense? Alright, so that is the first step. We determine what size of game we're going to be making. Step 2, we determine what objectives we're going to use. So this step is quite simple. Following the size outline that we discussed previously, choose a number of objectives relative to what you're designing. Variation is important, so whether you are planning out a series of games for a park day or a set of games for a large-scale event, change up the objectives between each game in the series for best results. You don't, for example, you don't want to run a kill, 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 or if you're running in a Shire, you don't want to run a kill game followed by a kill game followed by a kill game, because that will get stale. So a good example for a Shire, if you're running 3 games a day, game number 1, kill game. Game number 2, capture game. Game number 3, control game. Examples for a barony, which we're taking 2 of those objectives, roll a kill and a capture. Game 2 would be a capture and a control. Game number 3 would be a control and kill. So you are using the same objectives, but you're switching them up just to make it interesting. So Duchy Plus is an exception to this rule because you're using all 3 objective types in a Duchy Plus game. So variety is going to come specifically from the way you package those games, because you can't switch up what kind of your objectives you're using if you're using all 3 objectives all the time. So that's where packaging is a very important part of the process, which is going to lead us to step 3, packaging. So here's where the fun part begins. Spinning the simplicity of our objectives into intriguing goals for our players to compete for or over. And there is a multitude of ways that this can be done, and the limit is essentially your imagination. The biggest trick is, no matter what objective you're trying to describe, try and keep it as close to a 30-second window as you can. This is really, really important. That 30-second window, going back to what I said at the very beginning of the class, Amtgard battle gamers have a notoriously low attention span. So that 30 seconds is the maximum amount that you're going to have their attention when you're explaining. So a good rule of thumb, if your objective takes longer than 30 seconds to explain, it's too complicated. So ideally, that means a Shire level game is going to take 30 seconds to explain. A Barony level game will take 60 seconds to explain because you're explaining 2 objectives, right? And then a Duchy Plus should take you about 90 seconds because you're going to be explaining 3 objectives. If you take any longer, it's going to be really difficult to keep your players engaged. And engaged players are understanding players. Understanding players enjoy games. A lot of the salt and the games that people don't enjoy or don't have fun with is 99% of the time is because they don't understand what's going on the field. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They're just out there to hit people because the objective was too complicated, and that leads to salt. So understanding players, I'm going to say it again. Engaged players are understanding players, and understanding players enjoy games. When attention starts fading and the explanation of the rules becomes an unintelligible droning in players' heads, that's where confusion crops up and where the bulk of your in-game issues will stem from. Keep it short, sweet, and to the point, and everything will run smoother for it. So, how do we package things in a way that makes these seemingly simple objectives appear diverse and varied? Let's look at some examples. So, in this game, everyone has 4 lives. Shatter out the enemy team to win. It's pretty simple, right? Understandable? Everyone has 4 lives. Let's play. That's it. That's the game explanation. Second one. In this game, each team will have their respawns from Nirvana tracked. The team with the fewest respawns at the end of the game wins. Pretty easy to understand.
7 seconds.
I tried. All right, let's look at another one. Attackers have unlimited lives. Defenders have 4 lives. The defending team that survives the longest time wins. Really simple, really easy to understand. Less than 30 seconds. The players are going to know what's going on, and then you can get to play. All right, my 4th example. These are going to get a little bit more complicated, but we're still going to keep it very, very brief and to the point. Player A and Player B are captains. Captains have 3 lives. Players that aren't captains have unlimited lives as long as their captain is alive. Once a captain is dead, that captain's team cannot respawn. Shatter the enemy team to win. Understandable? Yeah, everybody. These are 4 very distinct feeling games. Like, you wouldn't say any of these games are the same game, right? 4 very distinct feeling games, and each one has its own strategies and play styles that will keep things fresh and prevent monotony. However, this is an illusion, as we recognize that the objective of each game is very simple: kill. All 4 of those were kill games, but we packaged them in a way that made them feel diverse and interesting, and that is going to create variation in what you throw. But as a game designer, I'm just like, oh yeah, kill, 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 kill. Super easy. And when you understand how your objectives work foundationally, it's very easy to implement them and get your explanations down as short as possible. So, each of these examples can be easily explained in a 30-second window, and players will grasp and understand quite quickly, even with questions. We were probably, obviously we had moved on to that point, but we probably didn't go much over the 30 seconds, even with questions being asked of these. So, you're going to get your players out on the field faster, and they're going to get to playing rather than just listening to you drone on about rules. So, again, each of these examples can be explained in a 30-second window. Players will grasp and understand quite quickly, and we can continue perpetuating the illusion that we put a lot of time and effort into making sure we provide a diverse set of games for people to enjoy, right? Which, as a designer, the less work that we have to do, the better it's going to be. So, now granted, there is more that we can do to make sure that we keep things diverse and keep players engaged, but at its core, all that we are doing is repackaging these elements with ever so slight variation. And as we start designing games for greater numbers of players, our process is going to remain the same. So, let's look at an example for a barony size game. Alright, so I'm going to give you a game explanation. So this should take me less than 60 seconds because it's going to be 2 objectives, right? Alright, in this game, teams will compete on 2 fronts. First, to collect as many generic tokens at their designated collection point as possible. Tokens require an open hand to carry or a game object, and the team with the most tokens at the end of the game will earn 1 victory point. Second, each team will elect a captain. The captain cannot be resurrected by any means. Each time the captain respawns, it will be tracked. The team with the fewest captain deaths will score 1 victory point. That's the game.
28 seconds.
28 seconds. I'm good
about 30, yeah.
Yeah, so again, this is coming out of a experience. I understand my games. I know how the design works. I have cut these explanations down to as minimum as I can so I can get people onto the field faster. But You still have approximately a 30-second window longer than we went to explain this game because there's multiple objectives. And you also take into account there will typically be questions, so that kind of factors in. So, let's look at a second example of a barony level game. In this game, teams will compete on two fronts. First, each team will have a designated flag base, and each team will start with the same number of flags. Flags require 2 open hands to carry, and the bearer is slowed, but they are affected per enlightened soul. Flags are game objects. The team with the most flags at their flag base at the end of the game will earn 1 victory point. Second, there are 3 node points scattered across the field. Players will compete to keep their team's designator on the node points as long as possible. The team with the combined longest time holding all 3 node points will earn 1 victory. That's it. That's the game. That is game number 2, right? So our third example, also a barony level game. In this game, teams will compete on 2 fronts. First, there will be a flag in the center of the battlefield with a designator for each team. Players will compete to keep their team's designator on top as long as possible. The team with the longest combined time controlling the flag will gain 1 victory. Second, each team will have their number of respawns from Nirvana tracked. The team with the fewest respawns from Nirvana will gain 1 victory. That's it. That's the game.
23 seconds.
23 seconds. That's 2 objectives, right? So that's a barony style game that is going to be new and different. And all 3 of these felt really distinct from each other, right? Like none of these felt like they were the same game process. All of them kept within that time limit of explanation. All of them felt different, and they all felt like they were there was a lot of thought and time put into it, right? But as designers, when we look at this, the first game that I gave you, capture generic tokens and kill the enemy captain, right? That's essentially what it boils down to. We as game designers just see a capture-kill game. The second game with the flag bases and the control nodes, it's a control capture game, right? The third game with the flag in the center and tracking respawns, it's a kill control game. So all 3 of these games are distinct from each other. They have a lot of variety, and they're going to create their own play styles within each game. But they're all really, really simple when you break it down. So it looks like we put a lot more time into creating all of these than we did, because all we did was think, oh, I'm going to create a barony game. You know, so I need 2 objectives. Let's do a capture-kill game. Oh, and now we have capture generic tokens, kill the enemy captain, right? So, as a design process, this is really, really simple. But when you're explaining it to your players, it's going to come across as a lot more distinct and varied. And it's, again, going back into the packaging aspect that I talked about, packaging is super, super important. So, herein lies the beauty of this system. When we understand the underlying core objectives of what we're trying to design, it comes easy to repackage them in a way that shows diversity in thought without putting a lot of mental strain on the designer. So all 3 of these games, I would play them. They sound like they would be fun, and I would be comfortable running any of these games at any event that I ran to that required a barony level game. But all 3 of these games, realistically, took me 5 minutes to design, because I just came up with, for the purposes of this class, I thought I need 3 examples. I need a capture-kill, control-capture, kill-control. And I did all of this on my computer at work during a 5-minute downtime that I had. I designed all 3 of these games. So game design doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. As long as you understand the fundamentals of our building blocks, you can make games like this that sound like there was a lot of time and thought put into them. But in reality, we're just utilizing our building blocks really well, and then utilizing packaging to give it to the player as something new and exciting. So, let's look at a last couple examples from a Duchy plus size game, right? So going back to what we were talking about earlier, we're going to utilize all 3 of our objectives: kill, capture, control. So, again, the explanation should be under 90 seconds because we are utilizing 3 objectives. We have 30 seconds per objective. In this game, teams will compete on 3 fronts. First, there will be 5 nodes scattered across the battlefield. Players will compete to ensure their team's designator is on top of the node. Nodes will be scored in 1-minute increments, with each node a team controls counting as 1 node point. The team with the most node points at the end of the game will score 1 victory point. Second, there are generic tokens scattered around the battlefield. These tokens require an open hand to carry and are a game object. Each time a player brings an object to a designated reeve at the center of the field, that player's team will score 1 token point. The reeve will then redistribute that object across the battlefield. The team with the most token points at the end of the game will score 1 victory point. Third, each time a player respawns from their nirvana, it will be tracked. The team with the fewest respawns will score 1 victory point. That's the game.
60 seconds.
I mean, yes, but theoretically in a Dutchy plus size game, you have multiple reeves. You say 60?
Yes.
Man. So, again, up to 90 seconds. 60 seconds is not a bad explanation time for a Dutchy plus game.
Right.
Example number 2 of a Dutchy plus game. In this game, teams will compete on 3 fronts. First, there will be 4 wandering monsters on the field. Monsters will have 2 points of natural ancestral armor. Their weapons will be natural and break shields and armor, and they will be immune to command. Each time a player kills a monster, that player must declare which team they are playing for. The team with the most monster kills at the end of the game will score 1 victory point. Second, each team will have a flag at a designated flag base. Flags require 2 hands to carry and are game objects. Players must bring the enemy flag to their base while preventing the enemy team from capturing their own. When both flags are present at a team's base, that team will score 1 flag point and a reeve will return the opposing team's flag to its original base. The team with the most flag points will score 1 victory point. Third, there will be a very heavy object in the center of the field. This object requires 4 open hands to carry, and all bearers are slow. The team who has the object furthest away from their nirvana at the end of the game will score 1 victory point. That's the game.
60 seconds.
60 seconds. All right. One more example of a Dutchy plus level game we're going to go over. In this game, teams will compete on 3 fronts. First, there will be a flag in the center of the field with a designator for each team. Players will compete to keep their team's designator on top for as long as possible. The team with the longest combined time controlling the flag will score 1 victory point. Second, each team will designate 3 VIPs. These VIPs will have 2 points of natural ancestral armor, may wield any equipment, and are immune to death, flame, and command. They will also have ward self once per life, charge 5. These abilities will replace all class features if this is played as a full class game. VIPs cannot be resurrected and must return to Nirvana to respawn. Each time a VIP respawns, it will be tracked by a reeve. The team with the fewest VIP respawns will score 1 victory point. Third, there will be 4 flags scattered across the battlefield. Each team will have a designated capture point. In 1-minute increments, a reeve will tally the number of flags at each team's capture point, and each team will get a flag point for each flag that they hold. After this tally, the flags will be redistributed across the battlefield. At the end of the game, the team with the most flag points will score 1 victory point. That's the game.
60 seconds.
Man, 3 in a row. What a roll. All right, so each of these examples has a kill objective, a capture objective, and a control objective. All right, I'm gonna try to move this forward as fast as possible. All right. So each of these examples has a kill objective, a capture objective, and a control objective, yet they are packaged in such a way that they are wildly distinct from each other. We have essentially created the same game 3 separate times, but we packaged it in such a way to create variety and keep players engaged. Additionally, our game explanations have some additional rules and variation to keep things fresh, but we stuck pretty close to our window of what we were supposed to explain, so all of our players should have remained engaged and have a solid understanding of the game's mechanics, and there shouldn't be any confusion on the field as far as gameplay. So, that's step 3. Step 4 is what I call other details. With our core concepts out of the way, now we can move into the necessary minutia. Spawn mechanics, nirvana placement, number of lives, terrain placement, all that good stuff. Most of these things can and should be adjusted on the fly based on the number of players, what classes are being heavily portrayed, individual preferences, and whatnot. I have my own set of personal guidelines that I typically work within for all of these things, but they are heavily dependent on what your players are going to have the most enjoyable time with, and I don't think that there is necessarily a one-size-fits-all rule set for these mechanics. The most important part is to make sure that your players are enjoying themselves and you're not creating an issue of non-fun with them. So, common pitfalls and how to avoid them. First and foremost, the biggest and most consistent issue that I see, especially with newer Smiths, is trying to complicate the game mechanics to make them stand out and be unique. There is nothing wrong with being different and unique, but I can absolutely tell you from experience, both as a designer and a player, that there is an issue with complicated. As I stated earlier on in the lesson, the average attention span of a battle gamer is notoriously short, and the more complicated a mechanic is, the longer you have to expend explaining instead of playing. Long explanations lead to players zoning out. Zoned out players don't listen. Players that don't listen don't comprehend. Players that don't comprehend get frustrated, and frustrated players cause issues for everyone. Avoid needless complication at all costs. The second thing that I'd like to touch on is a little bit more nuanced, but I found that it greatly affects the overall playability and enjoyment of games for everyone involved, and that is scoring mechanics. Scoring mechanics fall into one of two categories: win condition and progressive scoring. It is very important that we distinguish between the two and know when to use one over the other. Win condition objectives are very straightforward. Complete the objective and the game or the round is over. This can be really good for certain game types, especially on smaller fields, but it can lead to some really negative interactions in certain instances. There are few things more frustrating as a player than spawning into a game, spending 30 to 40 seconds on the field, and suddenly having the game called to a halt because one player found a way to cheese the objective that was not intended, and now you've lost the round without really even getting an opportunity to play. Another scenario that immediately pops into my head is with kill the captain style games. If you use a win condition scoring style with this, it incentivizes the captain to avoid combat at all costs. If you dying makes your team lose, why would you fight? You're just going to avoid combat, right? That's the best thing to do in that scenario from a strategic standpoint. However, that's not fun for the person that's stuck playing the captain. Like, when you go play a battle game, you don't want to just not play the battle game. But in a kill the captain style game that's a win condition, kill the captain will win the game. It makes it really unfun for the player who's playing the captain because they just shouldn't be playing for their team to have the best chance. That's lame. So, there are definitely instances where win condition works and works well, such as survival scenarios where the defenders have a limited life pool, team deathmatch with a life pool, ring the bell, certain scenarios of capture the flag, to name a few, but it doesn't work for everything and should not be a catch-all for design. It is also incredibly difficult to implement a win condition alongside other objectives, so I try to avoid using them on any game designed for parity numbers or more. So if you have less than 9 people, win conditions are great. If you have 10 or more people, I try to avoid win conditions just because it's really hard to do win conditions with more than one objective. Progressive scoring, on the other hand, has the game last for a designated amount of time and scores are tallied at time increments or at the end of the game. These scenarios work a lot better for a lot of different game types, as it gives players an opportunity to play a full game every time, and even if a team seems like they are on the back foot, they always have the chance to make a comeback and turn things around. The third thing I really want to touch on is avoiding win-more scenarios. Any mechanic or scenario in which the team that is currently winning gains an advantage is a detriment to the design and will lead to many feels-bad scenarios. A difficult fight can very easily become impossible if the way these mechanics interact isn't taken into account during game design, and an impossible fight is demoralizing to the team on the receiving end. Demoralized players don't have fun, and playing against a demoralized team also detracts from the enjoyment of the winning team. Let's take a look at some examples real quick. Scenario A, we have a very heavy object game where the goal is to bring the objective to your spawn point. This creates a huge imbalance in gameplay. The team that is currently winning gains the additional benefit of having to move a shorter distance to be relevant after they respawn. Over the course of the game, this will lead to substantially less cardio from the winning team, so they will be less tired, moving faster, and having to move less distance. This benefit only increases the closer they get to their spawn point. This can create a really unenjoyable scenario for the losing team, as they are having to work harder and longer to make less headway. This is an example of a win more scenario. And we did, whoever designed the object game that we played today took that into account with the game, which is why they have the object going horizontally across the field instead of back and forth. That is an example of not creating a win more scenario, and they did a really good job with that. So, scenario B. A shatter out deathmatch where each player plays at the level equal to their current lives. So you start with 6 lives at 6th level. As you die, you go down in levels. As the game goes on, the team with the worst performance gets punished, while the team with the best performance gets rewarded with their opponents that are being easier to deal with. So that's an example of a win more scenario. It's bad game design. When you punish the losing team for losing, it creates an unfair scenario. Scenario C, single flag capture the flag where the flag starts in the middle of the field. The first team to make it to the flag has a huge advantage, as they get to move the flag with near impunity, as the opposing team has to fight through the entire capturing team in order to even have a chance of getting at the flag. That will keep moving towards its goal unimpeded unless they succeeded. So even if the opposing team does happen to kill the flag bearer, the flag is in friendly territory, which poses a distinct advantage to the first team that got to the flag. There are countless more of these scenarios, and an exhaustive cataloging of them is impossible, but it is critical that you examine every scenario you design to ensure that it is free of these issues. You never want to create a win-more scenario. All right, I actually blew through that a lot faster than I was expecting. So in closing, we have established what our building blocks are: kill, capture, control. We have implemented them into a repeatable design process, designing for Shire, Barony, Duchy. And we have explored how to keep monotony from growing with our packaging process. So, that was my Building Better Battle Games class. So I hope you guys learned something.